English players cost a lot, like a lot. John Stones for 50 million, Harry Maguire for 80 million, Wan-Bissaka 50 million, Ben White 50 million, Ben Chilwell 50 million, Jadon Sancho 73 million, Jack Grealish 100 million pounds. And as a fan, some of these transfers can work out and we forget the expensive price tags and bask in the success that these players contribute to. Or they can lead to heavy scrutiny and endless memes with your boys constantly using the price tag as a reminder of just how bad of a deal it was. So why do clubs keep making these deals? And why is Declan Rice about to be the next £100 million player? So to begin with, I think it's important to establish how player transfer and prices actually work. There seems to be this misconception in football that players are sort of these itemized objects that are put on the shop window for fixed prices relative to their ability. That's not actually how it works. A player's transfer value is simply put just sort of the price that a team is willing to accept to part ways with that player and allow another team to register them. Now, of course, there are different factors that would lead a team to actually determine this price, and sure, ability is one of them, but it's not the only one. And we'll get into some of them later on in the video. Now, why this distinction is important is because ultimately it means that value is relative to whoever holds the asset. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, as they say. So remember Match Attack, right? I remember back in primary school, I was balling on the Match Attack cards, right? I had every card you could possibly ask for. And I remember one of my boys wanted my Man of the Match nanny card, right? And he was willing to offer me a trade of star signing Jovino and a star player Gareth Bale. And, you know, looking back on it now, I probably should have said no. His Jovino card was all mashed up, all bent around the corners. You know them boys that didn't take care of their cards properly. I'm sure you all had that one friend. And if you are that friend, I hope you're in prison now. But I was willing to accept it. I thought, you know what, it's cool. And for the most part, I was willing to accept it just because I had so many cards. I'd just gotten a golden legend Ronaldo card that day as well. I was on the top of the world. I had all the best cards. Like, I wasn't really bothered. But if I didn't have those cards, if maybe my Man of the Match nanny card was the only card I had, I probably would have went, yeah, you know what, bro, nah, I'm not gonna take that trade. And so the point there being is that a lot of the time, you know, the value is relative to what you have. And it's the reason why typically smaller clubs will hike up the prices of their best asset. Think about a couple of years ago, Crystal Palace asking for 80 million for Wilf Zaha. Now, for most clubs, 80 million for Wilf Zaha, you must be bugging. But to Crystal Palace, you know, he's worth that because at the time, especially, they just didn't have as much talent that could carry them in the way Wilf Zaha does. Now, a problem that clubs like Crystal Palace will have in that situation is that there's so much young attacking talent out there that why would a Man City pay the 80 million for Wilf Zaha when they can just go out and get a Ferran Torres for 30 million? Yeah, Ferran Torres probably isn't going to give you the same output as Wilf Zaha immediately, but there's obviously plenty of potential there. There's just so many young attacking wingers out there that eventually you're going to hit the mark on one without having to spend 80 million. But the big problem now when we relate this to Declan Rice and West Ham is that there isn't an abundance of young, top quality defensive midfield options. There just isn't. Right, I've spent a wealth of time scouting and watching and analyzing plenty of young defensive midfielders out there in Europe. And although there are some exciting ones, when it comes to the best of the best, to be honest, it is Rice, Tchouaméni, and after that, there is a drop-off. Even the ones who I really am excited about and think deserve opportunities at top clubs like the Kamaras of the world aren't quite on the level of Tchouaméni and Rice. And so if you're West Ham, you know you can probably hold out on a more expensive price tag for Declan Rice, simply because if a team wants a top quality young defensive midfielder, there ain't many places to go other than Declan Rice. So there's this thing called the CIAE Football Observatory, and they basically created an algorithm to value players based off of a bunch of different factors such as age and how much longer is left on their contract, the club's financial status, the league of clubs, and all these different factors that are things that genuinely will account for how much a player costs. It's a whole really cool thing. I'll leave a link in the description below. Tifo made a video about it in relation to Rashford. Like, it's really cool and they're doing really great work. It's actually really good because a lot of actual transfers that happen in real life are similar prices to what's on the CIAE Observatory. And I'm actually convinced that a lot of teams use the observatory's algorithm to value their players because it works really, really well. Now, in terms of where they value Rice, it's very interesting because amongst actual defensive midfielders who can play as lone sixes, Rice is valued as the third most expensive defensive midfielder by this algorithm after Joshua Kimmich and Rodri at Man City, which when you actually think about it makes a lot of sense. When you consider that Rice is only 23 years old, he's an England international, he's in the form of his life, he looks set to become one of the top defensive midfielders in world football for the next 10 years to come. When you consider the fact that West Ham are in the Premier League and are in a good financial position, like all these things taken into account, it's understandable why Rice is considered the third most expensive true loan 6. And in terms of the actual transfer value they've set on him, they have it at about £60 million. Now, I think £60 million for Rice is pretty realistic price. When you consider the fact that Rodri a couple years ago was bought by Man City for 55 million, I think 60 million makes sense, right? It would make him the most expensive defensive midfielder in history, but when you look at the current trends of how much defensive midfielders go for and just how much transfers are in general, Rice being the most expensive defensive midfielder ever does make sense. But of course, there is a difference between your team paying 60 million versus your team paying 100 million. There's a good chance if you're a Chelsea or United fan listening to this and you found out that your team bought Rice for 60 million, probably wouldn't blink twice. You'd probably be like, oh yeah, good business. Wow, I'm surprised they got the price down. But if it was 100 million, instantly you start to cringe a bit and you start going, is he really worth 100 million? Like, that's a lot of money. You could have bought somebody with that extra 40 million, and that is true. However, the CIAS doesn't necessarily account for some things that would cause for Rice's value to be more within the eyes of West Ham. So for example, the CIAS doesn't actually account for the fact that Rice has great relationships in within the club, and that, you know, West Ham consider him literally their vice captain. He is going to be the captain realistically if he stays, as Noble doesn't really play as much anymore, as well as the fact that Rice is one of the most marketable players in world football, right? Like, Rice's personality and character has become one of the traits that's made him one of the most liked players. Like, forget whether or not you're a fan of Declan Rice as a player, whether you think he's 100 mil, he's a very likable player, one of the more likable players, one of the players that actually shows personality in an era where it seems like players can sometimes be forced to act like robots. And so with all these things taken into account, West Ham probably will hike the price up a bit from that 60 million, and understandably. Right now, West Ham are in a fight for Europe. They want to be competing, they want to become one of the biggest clubs in the world and battle with the likes of Arsenal, Chelsea and Spurs in London, and Declan Rice is going to be key to that. And so without Declan Rice, they very much will lose a large part of what makes their team successful right now. And as Jack Grealish showed at Aston Villa, just because you get 100 million pounds for a player that is key to your system doesn't mean you could use that 100 million pounds to adequately replace them and to improve and or retain the level of success you had with that player. And now look, I don't think Rice is as key to West Ham as Grealish was to Villa, but there is some comparison there in terms of why West Ham would be very reluctant to let go of Rice unless it's for an astronomical price 100 million pounds seems to be. The truth is, the point of this video isn't to say that Rice is or isn't 100 million pounds. In my opinion, is he 100 million pounds? Probably not, that's a bit too much, but it is to at least get you to understand why West Ham would value him at 100 million pounds and why he would be worth 100 million pounds to them. Rice is someone that's incredibly key to their team in terms of the way they play and the actual atmosphere at the club. He is a rare commodity, as there's just not many talents out there who are going to be elite level lone sixes. Sure, there might be some decent defensive midfield players, decent pivot players, but in terms of people who have the ability to play as a lone six in a 4-3-3, which is a system a lot of the top teams are playing nowadays, there's just not many talents on Rice's level. The only other one that I can really give credit to in that regard would be Tchouaméni. And so if your club does end up going out and spending 100 million pounds on Declan Rice, don't be too quick to say he's overpriced, it doesn't make sense, because ultimately any club willing to pay that amount for Rice is clearly just saying, look, we are willing to pay this for him because he's going to be our captain and our lone six for the next 10 or so years, which when you put it like that, doesn't actually sound too bad. I definitely wouldn't mind that United having Declan Rice as my captain and my DM for the next 10 or so years. I think it'd probably be a big upgrade on what we've had for the past couple. And for that reason, good luck to whatever team gets him. But who knows, maybe no team will get him. And if you want to know why I don't think Boubacar Kamara is going to be the lone six to be United's captain for the next 10 years, click on this video on your screen right now.